inseparable from the action that they commit, but that requires a very nuanced view. And not the dehumanization in the process. Again, you're loving them, calling them to account in the middle of this. How do I become something? I got to be careful of who I'm becoming in this process. And how do you, though, remain gentle and not go into enemy mode?
If we can't figure out how to do this in politics, I don't know how we're figuring it out in other areas of life. I have a chapter in my book on gentleness, and I talk about some of the reasons why people think gentleness in politics is not viable. And I spent a lot of time talking about anger. And this has perhaps been the most surprising, striking thing about the reaction to the book, which is people really do think they need anger, particularly in politics. They are worried about what they would do without anger and without particularly the cultivation of anger. There is very significant teaching in scripture and church fathers and just history about particularly the cultivation of anger. And I have found it's one thing. I had the opportunity to speak on Capitol Hill to over 100 congressional staffers, and I knew this was going to be difficult for them because they're thinking, they're hearing me talk about our overestimation of what we think we could do with anger, and they're going, okay, but I'm going to go back to the office, and my boss is going to ask where the press release is, and my boss has a very particular sense of what makes for a good press release, and that's a pastoral issue. I want to walk people through that. That is not surprising to me. What's been surprising to me are people that don't have political jobs, whose political responsibility primarily consists of being a citizen, who push back very strongly against this notion. They'll say to me things like, how am I supposed to get anything done in politics without anger? And I'll ask them, could you give me a specific example of what you are seeking to get done in politics that you think anger will help you achieve it? And usually the conversation peters out. I genuinely want to learn more and get more to the root of this. It's one of the threads. When you write a book, you think, I'll never write another book again. I've said everything I have to say, but then you talk about the new book and there are all these threads and you go, oh yeah, maybe that. This is one of those threads. I very genuinely want to hear from individuals who don't have a political job. I understand those dynamics. There is a sort of anger can help you raise money, all that. But for the individual Christian in particular, what is it? What do you think you are accomplishing with anger that you couldn't accomplish without it? A big part of why we can't speak the truth in love in politics, why we feel like we need to use means that are not consistent with the faith, is because we do think politics is sort of cordoned off from God. We think that faithfulness is what you do in your personal life. But when I go to my workplace, look, there's a bottom line. And when I go to politics, really the way this is Willard's primary concern about political life, which is that politics sets up a kind of pseudo reality that is not determined by morality, but by the will of the people. And so if the will of the people is such that it runs counter to moral knowledge, and if you are not very thoughtful about the fact that politics is not a primary reality, then it really messes with people's epistemological sort of sense of what's real or not. And so you'll see this. You'll see when laws change. I mean, just to use an example on same-sex marriage, when the laws on same-sex marriage changed, I mean, it was like night and day. You watch Maryland, for instance, when Maryland passed same-sex marriage, you pull same-sex marriage 3 months, 6 months before Maryland passed a law legalizing same-sex marriage, and then you look at the polls 6 months after, and drastic changes. Well, did anything change? Did anything change about the moral questions involved? Did anything change about no? What changed is that uh, the sort of philosophical force of the law sort of led a lot of people to say, well, this is reality now. This is what my faith or my convictions, and of course people were coming at the question from a whole range of sources. A lot of them weren't thinking theologically at all, but this is, and that is a if it is very hard to speak truth in love in politics if you are concerned that every utterance. I actually was just doing an event last week, and someone said, well, look, I'm concerned if I, and of course I'm paraphrasing, but not too strongly here. Someone said, well, look, I'm concerned if I grant that my uncle, who has bad political opinions, has a point, isn't that going to help the other side? And I just said, help me understand. You're talking about a conversation, in your home with your uncle, right? Like, this isn't on cable news. Your uncle's not a sitting United States senator, right? And they're like, yeah. And I go, just maybe your primary moral obligation in that exchange is not how in some like vast metaphysical like political universe, how you granting your uncle with the political opinions you disagree with, how he has a point might play into the broader national political struggle. Politics becomes an all sort of consuming map for people's sense of reality. But Christians have a different map of reality. We have a different map of what is real. And if we're not willing to bring that into all of life, then we are going to find significant parts of ourselves. And because ourselves are not divided, we're going to find ourselves to be undiscipled. We are going to find that we have not taken off the old self with its practices, but because we have said there are areas of life in which the Lord is not Lord, in which Jesus's way does not necessarily hold up, that is going to have profound effects for our soul. Let me just say one more thing, and we probably don't have time to sort of get into it. There are things that you might decide for your household that you would not decide in a particular kind of society and politics like ours. This is the contingent nature of our politics. That does not mean that you don't think that Jesus's way holds up in politics. That means that you just recognize that politics is its own. You're applying Jesus's way and a discernment of Scripture in the political realm. So I don't want folks to hear me say, well, if we are believing that Jesus's way holds up in all of life, that means that we have the same answer on what we do in our own lives, in our households, in our families, at our workplaces as we would for politics. No, now we're getting into sort of political theology questions, but so I just wanted to state that so that there's no sort of confusion there.